Hey everyone, I'm Necromuncher. Let's draw. I start with a blank sheet, then quickly sketch a knife and a hand to hold the knife, also an arm to hold the hand and a body to hold the arm. I add the second arm-hand combo with splayed fingers ready for chopping. However, the thing this chunky person is about to chop won't be his chubby fingers, but instead, a fish. A very regular, common sort of level 1 fish you would find in any puddle, assuming you're in the right areas of the Kanto region. That's right, I promised you something nerdy, and today we're gonna catch 'em all, or at the very least one splashing red fish with incredible potential. Pokemon hunting is a dangerous business, so I gave our Pudgy Cook a helmet, a plump nose, and two perfectly round eyes to match his physique. At this point, I'm sure those of you who watched or played a bit of Pokemon could recognize the lovable character I chose to put in as the cook, and that's of course Senshi the dwarf, looking dead into the camera with a knife held up to make sure you had a balanced meal. I started writing this bit and suddenly came to ponder what would Senshi think about Monster Energy drink. I personally hate the thing, and I think our stout chef would agree with the notion that it's a dangerous chemical not meant for consumption. But tell me what you think in the comments and if the drink's color would have an effect on Senshi's decision. Speaking of monsters, I moved to the background to add one that would fit in a very large pocket. Despite Senshi's enchanting stare and the appeal of an anime cook show, it felt like the scene was too empty and needed a raging Gyarados mother. And yes, I say Gyarados, because that's how it's written. Every time I hear Gyarados, it makes me think of an unholy combination of Gyarados and Professor Oak's douche grandson Gary in a terrible Nina Tucker situation. And if that's not a reason to keep Gyarados angry, I don't know what is. To keep Mama G here company, I sketch in Elios holding his iconic sword Kensuke in one hand and what would be a barely perceptible PokeBowl in the other, in an ever-optimistic attempt to add her to either their party or their pantry. Quick Hydro Pump sketch, then on to Ed Marcel, who at least for the rough ideation will be standing firm with her staff at the ready. Last and dimension-wise least is Chilchuck, narrowly evading the powerful stream that would water-quarter him to tiny Chilchuck chunks. As I start the line art process, I make sure to add some smoothing to the brush I use for a smoother line. Here I go with about 40% smoothing for the long curves and about 25% for when I need something jagged but with a round aesthetic. The design of the helmet itself is fairly simple, but trying to get the perspective of the horns right was a bit of a struggle. I made sure to push and pull them and some other minor details like the thickness of the helmet's rim so it wouldn't look too flat or subconsciously jarring. Senshi's facial features are also very simple to get right, so placed where they need to be, I move on to finish the bottom of his helmet. Essentially done with the headgear, I move on to our friend's foremost feature, facial fur, or rather, full upper body beard. Following his original design, the beard should be almost completely black, so for now I treat it like a silhouette, leaving the details for future Necromuncher to add in color. As I move downwards, I add the fur-lined bracer and the hand that holds the fish. Finishing the fish's fins, I finally find the focus to finagle with the fish's fine facial features. I line in a long curvy shape for the wiggling whisker on top, then another for the gaping mouth. A quick jump to the tail fin to complete the portrayal of Magikarp's powerful splash, then a crown-like pectoral fin and a lovely scaly necklace. The last detail I add to the Arcana fish is the armored gorget. I leave the sacred whisker for later after I place the stone that acts as Senshi's cutting board. For now, I'll go and draw my favorite part, the hand. I know this isn't a common notion among artists, but I just love drawing hands. They're so expressive and I always have two perfect references in front of me. My personal bane is feet, which I think look wrong even if you get them right, much like horses in general and horse faces specifically. For that reason and several others, I try to avoid drawing feet and horses if possible. unfortunately they don't often come together. I draw the other fur-lined bracer on Senchi's knife arm and make sure to put beefy dwarven muscles on the arm itself. The cutting board is next to be lined in the form of a block of stone. I imagine this could be a pillar of the dungeon's Pokemon gym that collapsed at some point, maybe because some furious sea monster. I block in more broken blocks, basically to block Big Boy's bare feet from being visible. To make the flat chunks of plain rock to something a little less plain, I chip and crack it around the edges, where it would naturally have sustained damage and erosion. Now, it's the furious sea monster's turn. A little peek behind the curtain here, I draw this on one screen while constantly looking at references on the other screen. Otherwise I could have never remembered Gyarados had such a mammalian looking nose and this weird fan of horns as eyebrows. All I could think about was big blue angry water snake, which is technically not wrong. I did take some small artistic liberties to make Gyarados slightly more pointy and threatening than the original design. But I'm willing to bet none of you would notice what I changed exactly without checking for reference, which I consider a great success. With a crown-shaped dorsal fin in place, I make one part of the snake body, then duplicate it until it looks like a sea serpent's slithering segmented torso. I throw in some long curvy shapes for the mustache coming out of her chin, trying to give them a sense of movement that should help imply the same for her whole body. With the last details of our body in place, I start planning how the battlefield is going to look. Obviously, Gyarados can't be on solid ground, and while the party can't stand on water with Marcel's magic, I felt that the scene consisted only of water would be boring. I leaned into the idea that this is a collapsed Pokemon gym hidden in the undiscovered parts of the dungeon. To better tie the scenery with our characters, I had a hydro pump cracking the floor where Charlie just stood. It helps to both create action and a sense of depth in the scene, with the added value of making Gyarados look appropriately powerful. To really sell that this is a dynamic action scene and not a static 2D picture, the in-dungeon sea must roll with high waves, causing ripples around everything. I tried to make the strength of the waves in the distance and the relative calm of the ripples in the front to give a more exaggerated depth of field, but in truth I don't really think it got that effect. If this video wasn't already the longest video I ever made, I might have added a few crashing waves to drive the point home. But ultimately, if you're still here and watching this, I must be doing something right, and for me it's good enough. The two main focus points of this scene being Senshi and Gyarados done, I start lining our party members. I had an internal debate about how much detail I should add into Lysa's armor, since it's so tiny no one would know the difference. I ended up losing that debate and adding all of the plating, fabric, folds and hair. A teeny tiny hand holding a teeny tiny PokeBowl and we're done with our hungry knight. Like in the sketch, next is Marcel. Now, Marcel being the DPS mage she is, leaves the tanking to the tank and keeps her distance from whatever it is they're fighting, which means she's much closer to the front of the scene and requires much more details to look somewhat okay. Long curvy shapes block in her hair to show movement in a similar way to what I did with Gyarados' whisker thingies. Looking at the references and fan art helped me understand her complex hairstyle that has not only long billowing unbound hair, but also a bun, two braids, and whatever you call this two-tiered parted loaf she's got going on. It was surprisingly difficult to find good quality references for everyone's backside, and by good quality I mean clothed and dry. At some point I considered excusing everything with the doppelganger episode, but I decided to pass the idea since even for a poor depiction I would need some backside references. I ended up finding some halfway decent references on Google and the rest from freeze framing the show myself. The twisty lines on Marcel's staff add a natural woven wood appearance that is capped with a pair of small baby leaves. To really drive home the sense of movement that I try to convey using the hair, the robe gets a similar billowing treatment, before I have to deal with the fact that what guides the movement is the feet and not the body. By deleting the robe, I'm able to more clearly pose her legs into position like some sort of a torso-less half-formed Raymond Barbie doll. Then, I bring the robe back and shape it appropriately to what is now her final pose. I mentioned her magic before, and just so you won't think I forgot, I drew Marcel and her stylish sandals ever so lightly walking atop the face of the water. Now back to finish Gyarados. By finish, I mean copying and pasting the segments of snake body that I already made, then repositioning them until I get a graceful arc. Of course, I can't just copy and paste all willy-nilly without cleaning overlap lines, adding connecting elements, and making the whole part decent to the point it looks like I know what I'm doing. I then start with the hard part, the end of Gigi's tail, which is hard because I can't just copy and paste anymore, and I actually have to think about rotational perspective in order to make it work. Also, this is the end of her body, which means this is technically the serpent's feet, and if you watched the video and didn't skip to this part, you should know why I have a problem with that. If you did skip to this part, hi, I'm Necromuncher, I'm drawing a PokeBowl. Please consider starting the video from the start, you maniac. To add some flair on an otherwise completely normal scene of perfectly reasonable people having a banal interaction with common animals, I make the water fancy. Not in a European restaurant sparkly sort of fancy, but more in the powerful magical double helix swirls and splashes sort. The sparkly hydro pump is a shiny Gyarados special move that you can get only in the Champagne region of France. Despite not being naturally fermented in bottle, this hydro pump is still strong enough to demolish whatever poor thing that stands in its way. Chilchuck is disguised as Scott Pilgrim in an effort to gain an extra life, if his plan of jumping away from the collapsing stage isn't going to cut it. I spent way too much time on the tiny details of this tiny dude, and while I did enjoy drawing them, a lot of the micro design decisions I make here don't make a lot of difference in the final product. So, a knife in Cherry Choro's hand, and we're off to crack up the floor with appropriate cracks and crevices. I also add a big PokeBowl design so you can tell this was once a respectable establishment. A few flying shards add a sense of movement and danger to this already busy battlefield, and finally, I am done with the line art. For the coloring process, I first block in a stormy blue-gray for the background and a 90s anime water light blue for the sea. Our big danger noodle gets a slightly darker blue and the floor gets a sandy off-white yellow. Water blue for the water, metal gray for the metal, and sandy blonde yellow for the sandy blonde hair. Marcel gets an even darker blue base that I cover partly by coloring her hair. Chilchuck gets a brown to match his shitty personality, and we're off to the main piece. Or not, because I apparently forgot to color the nearest chunk of floor. With that out of the way, Senchi's base color is a Senshi skin tan. The fish gets his iconic orangish red, and his soulless eyes get the expected white. This is where we start adding the base colors for the separate elements, and where the drawing actually starts looking somewhat reasonable as an art piece. Of course, this is but an illusion, and you can see that we're only halfway through. I think that in future videos, to save you some time and salvage what is left for my sanity, I'll cut the more tedious parts of the drawing process away. I mean, there isn't that much to be said about magic wand lassoing and paint bucket feeling each and every detail. Other than maybe the color choice itself, which, when I think about it, is quite important for the final outcome. It's key to pick colors that match each other's vibrancy in order to make all the parts feel cohesive and unified. Also, not forgetting the basics of complementary colors, in order to pop what you want popping. In some pieces I'll actually sample the colors from the reference picture, but since these two shows are quite different in their color scheme, with Dungeon Meshi having a lot of grays and browns and Pokemon being the anime equivalent of an RGB keyboard, I decided to mix and match the colors by eye until everything looks okay. Finished with the color blocking, I moved to add the accent color on each part. This is not exactly shading or highlight, and I'm not actually sure it's called an accent color, but I call it that because much like a real accent, it gives roundness and depth to the otherwise seemingly flat character. The color choice for the accent color is somewhat random, since I just go by whatever feels right. Though, looking back, it seems like in most cases I choose slightly darker shades as accents for the light colors and vice versa, which makes sense if you think about it. The accenting process is even longer than the color blocking, so for now you'll have to believe me that I added the accent to where accent had to be added.
Greninja, use cut now!
Shading in general should consider the light source of the scene and how it affects each object and material. The more realistic you want something to look, the more you have to consider the exactness of how light from each light source affects your scene. But I didn't do that, because I didn't want to. The scene has a sourceless ambient light that is somehow coming from above and behind, but not really. So, yeah, I just added shading to where I thought shading should go. I put big shadows, small shadows, hard shadows, soft shadows, and shadows with lots of other adjectives that Dr. Seuss would be proud of. With this professional attitude, I managed to make things look decent enough that at a glance it looks not terrible, and to be honest, I think I did a fairly good job. I color in the sky in a red to grey gradient that can be either a calm sunset or a bloody sky that reflects the massacre that is probably soon to come. In all seriousness, I chose red to both match Magikarp and to add drama, since psychologically red is associated with intense emotion. All that's left now is spot highlights, which I selectively added then blurred. There is always some time to add more layering to the shadows, so I darkened the foreground in an attempt to cram in a bit more depth with as little effort as possible. Well, that was almost all. I add some effects to make everything look more fantastical, like water pooling on the stone under the pokefish, and some actual magic. To make Marcel's explosion magic, I drew in some action arrows pointing at the tip of the staff to show the accumulation of power to be released. I add lines, glowing dots, and plenty of layer effects until the magic looks magicy enough for my taste. And we're done. Let's take a look. I am so pleased with how this came out. This is way better than I thought I could make in such a limited time. Not to mention the fact that this is an anime, and everyone who knows me and my art knows that I can't draw anime stuff to save my necromantic life. Thank you everyone for watching. This has been a real pleasure to work on, and you can hear that I record despite being sick because this is important to me and just so much fun. If you want to support me, I have a Patreon. I actually uploaded there some stuff from the process of this video, and I plan on doing the same for the next one. You could also like and subscribe and share to your friends or foes, or not if you don't want to, but it would help me if you would. Tell me in the comments what you want to see next, and for now, bye!